Are we live?
We are live.
No, we're not live again.
Yes,
This
we
always
are.
happens and it surprises me, Ned. Always live all the time.
Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another episode of the TechForge podcast. In fact, this is episode number 39.
What?
Indeed.
We should at least be 40 by now.
Well, we did skip a week or two in there, but we'll be 40 next week.
Fine.
And we do have some interesting show topics this week. We've got AMD news with the announcement of their 50th anniversary on May the 1st, and some special products they're going to be debuting then. We also have leaks about Nvidia's upcoming GTX 1650, including price and specifications.
Sweet.
And, well, Intel also is going to be launching some new processors soon, but they also have a new security problem in the, quote, death metal suite.
What? They're just too silly, dude.
But perhaps the most interesting news this week for gamers, regardless of whether you're a PC gamer or a console gamer, is there was some confirmation this week of the hardware specifications for the upcoming PlayStation 5. So we talked about last week about the leaks about AMD's Gonzalo APU, which is presumably the one that's going to go into the next generation consoles. Well, it was confirmed in an interview with Wired this week. Excuse me.
Interesting.
There was a Sony executive, Mark Cerny, who was interviewed by Wired magazine. And in that interview, he confirmed several pieces of information. First of all, they wanted the audience to know that, yes, the PlayStation 5 will feature a Zen 2-based CPU paired with a custom variant of AMD's upcoming Navi GPUs. This is something that has been rumored and generally thought to be true for months, but now we have official confirmation.
Great.
The information, I've included links. I've included the one-tab link down below in the description if you want to take a look. I'd have links to both the Wired interview and the TweakTown article that summarizes what was discussed. In particular, it is going to be a custom 3rd-gen Ryzen Zen 2-based CPU, a custom Radeon Navi-based GPU.
Interesting.
It is going to have a full SSD for its storage subsystem. And it is going to feature GDDR6.
No way.
The memory.
No way.
So
that's crazy, Ned.
Yeah, they aren't saying just yet whether or not what type of SSD we're going to be looking at. But honestly, if they don't go NVMe, I don't think we're going to see a huge enough performance uplift for people to be able to tell the difference. I mean, don't get me wrong. There is a world of difference between your average SATA SSD and your average SATA hard drive.
Mm-hmm.
Even your fastest SATA hard drives struggle to reach 200 megabytes per second. Whereas your SATA SSDs are constantly pushing up to the edge of the SATA 3 standard at 550, 560, some as much as 570 megabytes per second.
Really?
And that's for relatively budget SSDs that use the SATA interface. But with NVMe, we've seen even budget NVMe drives easily break 1,000 megabits per second or megabytes per second in the 1 to 2 gigabytes per second range.
Yes, sure.
So, again, they didn't mention that, but they also mentioned that the PS5 will, according to Sony, support ray tracing and 8K video playback.
Interesting.
So notice that is video playback, not gameplay.
Right. Well, it's gonna do. There's no way that thing's gonna do 4K. I mean, it's gonna be Navi. It's probably gonna have an SSD or an SSHD, right? But like, there's no way that that thing will play games at 8K. I mean, people have to be realistic.
Right.
You know, it'll. I would think it would do 4K medium. That would be, I think, attainable, if not in the first generation of games. Eventually, because you know they'll get the most out of that console, and it. I mean, by all rights, that thing's a massive upgrade because what they have before Jaguar cores and 5400 RPM hard drive
Yep.
on a glorified 580, right? So
Pretty
or
much.
480.
I think my microphone dropped out there for a minute, so sorry about that.
That's okay.
What the fact I was trying to mention before my microphone cut out was that the RX 580 that's in the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X doesn't actually render games at 4K. It renders them at 1080p and then upscales them to 4K.
Interesting.
So they will play video back at native 4K resolution, which is why you can play 4K Blu-rays on your Xbox One and your PS4.
Oh yeah.
But native gameplay is not rendered at 4K.
No, it's upscaled, man.
Yeah, it is upscaled from 1080p. Likewise, what we will likely see on this new console, if it has a Navi GPU, likely it will be rendered at 1440p and upscaled to 4K or 8K, which I imagine will be upscaled to 4K because 8K displays aren't really ubiquitous in the market yet.
Yeah, what's that show that Gordon Maung is on? That was a PC Magazine or whatever.
PC World's The Nerd Talk.
Yeah, so they were talking about it the other day, and I happen to tend to agree with the what's his name that always calls in or dials in. He does some really good video card reviews.
Brad Shakos.
Yeah, I tend to agree with them. Basically, I'm looking forward to what potential the PlayStation 5 has with upping the quality of games that we will see, because it's going to use, I mean, it's basically going to use a Ryzen 8 core processor with probably a decent amount of RAM and a decent video card or APU built into it. I kind of think, and I agree with them. Again, I'm kind of regurgitating what they said, but it's had a bit of it. The current PS4 and Xbox One have had not the best effect on PC gaming. I mean, yes, they can easily port, console games to PC, and with some work, they could do the same with a PC game to console because of the x86 architecture. But the problem is they're running on very, very weak CPU parts. So they really have to optimize for that. And Chacos had given an example on open world games where those tend to leverage CPU more and I/O from your storage device. So there's only so much you can do with Jaguar cores and a 5400 spin RPM hard drive.
Right.
Whereas, go ahead.
I was going to say, and remember, the Jaguar cores were considered low end back when they were originally produced in 2013.
Mm-hmm. Extremely low end. Like, this is tablet low end. They weren't even FX cores, So, and for at least since Sandy Bridge, Intel has had 4 good cores on their CPUs. So even if they had 2 or 4 of the maybe not quite Sandy Bridge based CPU cores, but something comparable, maybe the climate would be a little different now. Not saying it's horrible, but I'm looking forward to it. I mean, it should have a nice effect on PC gaming.
Yeah, and given that Zen 2 has IPC and processing power on par with the Skylake and later CPUs, I think technically Ryzen 1 had IPC equivalent to Haswell, but
Mm.
Ryzen 2 had IPC closer to Skylake, Kaby Lake, Coffee Lake.
Well, are you talking Zen Plus, or when you say
Oh,
Ryzen
sorry,
2?
I meant Ryzen 2000, but Zen
Ah,
Plus.
okay. Well, and I mean that comes from a lot of optimizations from cache and kind of a slight optimization of the memory controller. I mean, if you have an experience between a Zen Plus and an original Zen, you can tell the difference. It's not huge, but you can tell the difference. I mean, the Ryzen 2K part seems a little snappier, and that's just from all the optimizations from the cache and reducing latencies and stuff. So yeah, I'd probably agree with that. But I don't know if what they've got in the newest Epic line is any indication. There's a very solid uh, upgrade in terms of IPC from Zen Plus to Zen 2. I mean,
Agreed.
it's a redesign of that architecture. At its heart, yes, it's still Zen, but the chiplet design is amazing. The fact that it's a fully modular design now. They
Mhm.
can put any kind of IO die on there that they want. They can put as many chiplets on the package as will fit. So it's amazing. It's brilliant, actually, and it's so simple.
Right.
I mean, APUs are going to be easy for them to design. Okay, they put one or two chiplets on there, and then they put a Navi chiplet. And yes, it's looking like Navi is going to be a chiplet design as well. It's not. I very much doubt it's going to be monolithic. So that's freaking awesome, honestly. So it's going to be
Yeah.
interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. I think the thing that threw most people off about Navi was that the statement early on that it wasn't going to be crossfire on a single chip, which led a lot of people to believe, oh, it's going to be another monolithic GPU. Well, now the indication looks like Navi is going to be a chiplet design, but it's going to be an IO chiplet and a GPU cores chiplet.
But technically they are correct. It is not
Yes,
using a crossfire design. It's using a different type of interconnect.
exactly. And that I think that's what threw so many people off is people thought crossfire meant, oh, it's not going to be multiple chiplets.
Right.
Or they took crossfire to be shorthand for, it's going to be a single GPU die.
Yeah.
Regardless, we know when Navi comes out, it's likely still going to be using the PCIe 3.0 standard because that's what all the motherboards currently available use. But we do know quite a bit of information now about the upcoming PCIe 4.0 standard. And that's what this article from Tom's Hardware, which is the next one we're going to take a look at,
Cool.
discusses.
Okay.
You know, we know that PCIe from generation to generation, bandwidth roughly doubles to where PCIe 1.0 had a bandwidth of 8 gigabytes per second. PCIe 2.0 had 16 gigabytes per second. PCIe 3.0, the current standard, has 32 gigabytes per second of bandwidth, whereas PCIe 4.0 is supposed to have 64 gigabytes per second of bandwidth.
That'll
With
be interesting.
as the as PCIe SIG puts it, a 16 gigatransfers per second transfer rate. So 16 billion transfers per second.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's been a long time coming. We've had PCIe 3 for a long time. So, and the cool thing is they're just following the previous trend of doubling every generation. So, and it should be backwards compatible. So, that's kind of cool.
But what we do know is that the PCIe 4.0 specification was finished all the way back in 2017.
Mm-hmm. I wonder why they're just now debuting it.
Well, as it turns out, we really haven't hit the bandwidth limits of PCIe 3.0 yet, even
Oh,
though that standard was released in 2010.
does that mean we'll see, instead of 4x NVMe, we'll see 2x?
Who knows? In theory, or we may see more 4x that has even more bandwidth.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
But
Very.
what we do know is that in January of this year, AMD was the first to announce that they would have a motherboard chipset that would support PCIe 4.0 out of the box. And that was their X570 motherboard chipset. They announced that at CES.
Yep.
And then around the same time, Phison was the first to demo the world's first PCIe 4.0 SSD. And it had sequential read speeds of 4 gigabytes per second.
Seriously?
And sequential write speeds of 4.2 gigabytes per second.
That's insane.
Of course, they were using very expensive Micron 96 layer TLC flash, which is top of the line for TLC flash. But they are intending to switch to Toshiba's BICS4 technology, which is supposed to have even greater throughput potential. They're claiming of up to 4.8 gigabytes per second and 4.4 gigabytes per second reads and writes, respectively.
That's interesting. I wonder what they have to do to achieve that. If that's just simply changing out the interconnect in the controller, or if it's more modifications to the memory, or how the memory is laid out or structured. I wonder what those modifications include over the standard layouts that they're currently using on the PCB.
That's a good question. But if you wanted kind of a sneak peek, currently only PCIe 4.0 GPUs in existence are AMD's Radeon Instinct MI60s.
Yep. Yep.
Which technically, the Radeon 7 is a slightly downclocked and slightly detuned Radeon Instinct MI60. However, AMD did go on record as saying that the Radeon 7 does disable support for PCIe 4.0 because, quote, consumers don't need the throughput of PCIe 4.0 yet. And they're right.
I mean, it's evident because, unfortunately, like every other Vega in existence, you have to tune it a bit. But a Radeon 7 out of the box, most of them will do 2.1 gigahertz on a decent voltage. I mean, they're not as hot as people think they are. And it doesn't take much for a Radeon 7 to actually surpass a 2080 in performance. I mean, the sheer fact that you can overclock it on air to 2.1 gigahertz and still run 250 watts to 300 watts on that card, that's extremely impressive. And I mean, say what you will, being Vega and, not a gaming card, it's still a very good performing card, even though it costs a truckload of cash to make.
Right.
Thank you, HBM2, for that. But It's an impressive engineering feat, nonetheless. I mean, it kind of shows you it's almost like uh, it almost kind of gives you some details as to what Navi performance can be like. Because Navi is going to be pure gaming card. You know,
Right.
it's going to be a small, power efficient GPU. It's going to have DDR6, and it's interesting. I mean, if they're getting 1.8 to 2.2 gigahertz out of the box on air with a supercharged Vega part at 7 nanometer, look at what they can do with a decent, you know, designed for gaming type of GPU at 7 nanometer.
And consider, we talked about the Gonzalo APU last week.
Mhm.
The engineering samples that we're seeing for those have Navi GPUs hitting in the 1.8 gigahertz range.
Yeah, and
That's
that's probably go ahead.
That's 1800 megahertz, which is on par with the high end of what Radeon 7 can do.
Well, not only that, but it's getting close to the limits of what most of the touring cards boost to. You know, on a decent day with decent cooling, anything from the 1660 on up to the 2080 Ti only boosts up to about 1.8 to 1.9 gigahertz, and the fact that the engineering samples are known to be clocked lower than what the final clocks will be, because they're trying to operate within some safe parameters as they're nailing down clocks and power consumption and thermals and all that stuff. If that's any indication of that, it's likely we'll see Navi at 2 gigahertz or maybe even higher than that. So it's interesting.
Yep. And we'll talk a little more about that later when we discuss some of the rumors around the Navi release. But we'll get to that in the AMD section. I know we've kind of been hitting around AMD already, but I wanted to separate out the PS4 stuff from the other AMD news because there are some other important things with AMD this week.
Okay.
But before we get there, this one was shared by Hunter, and I was really hoping he can join us tonight, but unfortunately, Hunter is currently in an area that is under a tornado warning, and so for his own safety, he decided it would be best not to join us this evening.
Yes, Hunter, I do believe, is in his bunker right now.
He is definitely in his place. He is in a safe place at the moment, so we can at least take solace in that.
Yes.
But he shared this story originally. Deepcool upgrades their AIO CPU cooler with anti-leak pressure bag. Now, this is an interesting development. I've actually looked at the Deepcool Castle RGB coolers in the past, but I've always kind of passed them over for other options because, well, I wasn't a big fan of the Deepcool aesthetic.
Yeah.
But apparently, they had an issue with some leakage on their early models that required some returns. And so this is an updated version of that all-in-one CPU cooler that has a new anti-leak feature that they're calling the pressure bag. And so I'm going to share my screen here so that everyone can see what I'm talking about. Basically what this is it is a plastic sleeve or a rubber sleeve that's heat and corrosion resistant that is added to the AIO right here where the the radiator meets the pump block as a means to bleed excess air from the system.
Is that the pump block in the radiator?
Or well, that's more the interchange right there. Pump block's over here.
Ah, okay. Pump block is actually on the CPU block then, huh?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So, my mistake. This part here is just where the fittings connect into the radiator itself.
Ah, okay.
But you notice they've included this pressure bag here, this piece to help regulate air pressure in the system. According to this article from Tom's Hardware, the bag itself is made of a DuPont EPDM material that is elastic, averse to corrosion, aging, and resistant to the impact of high-low loading. Whatever that's supposed to mean.
Nah, it's just a fancy rubber is all it is.
Basically, you're right. And so with the inclusion of this new anti-leak feature, they're hoping that the newest version of the Deep Cool Castle 240 RGB V2 will sell better than the original version and prevent those leaks going forward. It is a very pretty RGB cooler.
It
I
is
will
pretty.
say.
I don't know if I agree with the price though.
The price, yeah, that's where they kind of lose me too, is the price.
Because you can get a 360 for a lot less than that.
Stop that. So yeah, for $199.99, yeah, you could go out and get a Fractal Celsius S36 and still have money left over.
Or a Thermaltake Ring non-RGB.
Yep.
For right around that, somewhere between 120 and 130, you can get a 360. So,
right.
Or heck, even 150, you can get the Kraken X52, which is a 240 mil. So, it's interesting technology, right? But
yeah, at that price, it's a little bit too much for my taste.
I mean, because not too much more. Well, actually, for not too much more than that, you're starting to look at some of the low end open loop kits. Honestly,
yeah, like the SwiftTech H series or some of the EK Fluid Gaming series.
Well, EK Fluid Gaming, or even some of the brass and copper stuff. You're starting to look at $200-$300 for a lot of those kits, and obviously with an open loop, you can do anything you want with it. So you can add more radiator. I don't know. Yeah, it's a little steep for me. I don't know, Mr. Ned.
Well, that brings us to the AMD portion of the program. And there are a couple of specific things I want to talk about here. Namely, as I mentioned at the top of the show, AMD is celebrating their 50th anniversary on May the 1st of this year. So they've been in business for 50 years. And as part of that, they and their partners are going to be releasing some 50th anniversary edition parts. Among them, a Ryzen 7 2700X variant. This comes from TechSpot. So there was at least one online retailer, shopblt.com, that listed a Ryzen 7 2700X 50th anniversary edition with Wraith Prism cooler. Now, they initially listed it at $340.95, which seems a little bit high given the current price of the Ryzen 7 2700X is around $260.
Right. And you get a nice looking RGB cooler with that.
Well, this also comes with the same Wraith Prism cooler, but still. Yeah, that seems a little high. But then again, if this is just them adding the listing ahead of time, then, maybe this is an intentionally high price based on early samples. Yeah, we don't know.
Or pre-order. I mean, some places trying to get in early on the pre-order, so.
They say that the special edition model will be available for pre-order as early as April the 30th. And so we know that AMD is going to be debuting their Ryzen 3000 series in the near future.
Mm-hmm.
It's generally believed that toward the end of May is when they're going to be debuting that. So Is a 50th anniversary Ryzen 7 2700X really worth it? I don't know. I mean, admittedly, Intel did the exact same thing with the i7 8086K last year, which was just an 8700K that was guaranteed to hit 5 gigahertz.
Which, I mean, for all intents and purposes, that was kind of a cool part. And there was a little back and forth between AMD and Intel, so that's always fun to see.
So maybe this is AMD taking a page out of Intel's book, or maybe this is just they have some Ryzen 7 2700Xs that are binned pretty highly, and they're just releasing them as this anniversary part.
Well, you can easily overclock a 2700X beyond 3.7. I mean, most 2700Xs will hit 4.2 gigahertz all core overclocks at like 1.35 volts. So, if you're hitting it hard with like a power virus, you could easily see 130 watts of consumption, but that's not too bad considering what it is. But it'd be interesting to see what binned 2700Xs are capable of.
Indeed.
I would wonder if they could get much beyond 4.2. I doubt it, but it would be kind of cool to see. Like, hey, we've just released a 4.1 gigahertz 2700X. It'll boost up to 4.3 or something,
Indeed. But that's not the only 50th anniversary product that's going to be put out this year for AMD's 50th anniversary. No, Sapphire wants to get in on the action too, with perhaps the most gaudy GPU I've ever seen.
What? This
and
looks all right.
That is
What?
this Sapphire Nitro Plus Radeon RX 590 50th Anniversary Edition. Yes, you're looking at that correctly, with a gold box and a gold-colored cooler.
What's wrong with that? It's gold. You don't like gold. I think it looks pretty.
You know what? In the right build, it would look beautiful. But
yeah.
you would have to go all out for the silver and gold theme. Maybe an MSI titanium board with Trident Z Royal RAM. And you'd have to go for the full aesthetic. I do like the backplate though. I like that backplate design.
Yeah, the Sapphire Nitro backplates have always been really nice looking. And if I'm not mistaken, they actually have heat pads on the back side of them, so they actually act like a heatsink and not just an aesthetic.
Some of them do.
Yeah.
The only thing that gets me is right now the price, which is €299.90. Roughly $338.99 USD.
They need to get back on their regular medical prescriptions, man. That's crazy talk.
Now, admittedly, that's coming from PCDIGA, which is a Portuguese company, and they do have a 23% value-added tax, which means if you remove the VAT, it actually comes out to about $275.
Still, it's not worth it.
Which is still way too much, but is slightly more sensible than $338.
Well, it's more sensible, but it's not worth it, man. I mean, what are they? They're touting a 1560 megahertz boost clock, and most people are hitting overclocks between 1615 and 1650 on most RX 590s from Sapphire or Power Color, namely those two. And okay, fine. I'll tell you what. I'll go buy the Power Color or the Sapphire for $220. Spend $2 on some spray paint. Spend another $2 on some, some painter's tape or whatever, and boom, I got my gold edition.
Right. Although, admittedly, having seen this, I am terribly tempted to do a AMD 50 Golden Anniversary mod, where you just go all out with the gold theme. You start with like a white case, and you do gold accents, highlights with this card, and like I said, the maybe an MSI titanium board, and the Trident Z Royal RAM.
Oh my gosh, man! It would look pretty. I'm not gonna lie. It would definitely look pretty, especially if you had some, some nice custom power cables and I don't know, some other stuff. Or even if you went all out with some water cooling, like you could get like, say you had like a white case, you could do like gold and white, or golden, yeah, I guess gold and white fans, and I don't know, some gold coolant even.
Yeah, you could go the whole 9 yards.
Or white coolant. White coolant would look all right.
Yeah, white coolant would look really good. So, at this point, we're still talking about, Zen and Zen Plus, and we have Zen 2 right on the horizon. But, somebody has been messing with his water cooling fluid.
I got white coolant. I'm gonna sniff it. Woo, that's stinky. Don't drink that stuff. It's not milk.
No, it is not.
Lots of chemicals.
But there was an interesting article that popped up on PC Games In about 3 days ago, talking about how AMD Zen 3 CPUs, now remember, that's not the same as Ryzen 3000. Zen 3 is what comes after Zen 2. But they're claiming that AMD Zen 3 CPUs can increase transistor count by 20% over Ryzen 3000, thanks to TSMC's 7nm plus node.
And reduce power consumption by 10%.
So think about that. Ryzen 3000 is already a pretty significant leap over both Zen and Zen Plus when it comes to transistor density, power efficiency, and clock speed.
They're basically saying twice the CPU resources over Zen Plus.
Right.
So I don't know if that's a 50% gain or what that actually amounts to, but yeah.
Well, just consider. Basically what this means is that take whatever the die area of a Ryzen 3000 CPU will be, which we don't have official specs on that, but given that it's 7 nanometers and we're going from a 12 nanometer process to a 7 nanometer process, that in and of itself is a drop of almost 40%.
Which that's insane.
This would be a further 20% reduction from that. So no, that's not a 60% reduction total. It's about half of Zen Plus, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
But what's enabling all this is TSMC's EUV, or extreme ultraviolet lithography process. We talked about that a couple of times in the past, but basically they use UV exposure to cut the traces, essentially, into the wafer. And because they're using ultraviolet instead of some of the lower wavelength, it's because it's such a high frequency.
Mm-hmm.
It enables you to make much finer traces and to make the transistors that much smaller and put them that much closer together without having the gate leakage problems. Now, one of the biggest problems you get when you have high density of transistors is current leakage, where if the transistors are too close together, then the charge will simply leak between them without actually having crossed the transistor, because there's not enough insulator there to keep the signals separate. Well, EUV makes it easier to make more smaller transistors within a smaller space. And so I'm excited to see how Zen 3 stacks up. It's estimated that Zen 3 will arrive sometime in 2020, which is not surprising.
Well, they've basically had a new version of Ryzen every year. So
Since the original release in 2017, absolutely.
and Zen Plus, for what it was a nice upgrade.
Indeed. Alrighty. Let's see what's next on the agenda. Ah, yes. This was quite the kerfuffle this week in the tech enthusiast community. This is the original article from Tech Power Up on MSI. Supposedly, I say the original article. This originally started as a Reddit post, and it blew up where MSI's support basically told a customer that their board would not be compatible and would not be receiving a BIOS upgrade for Ryzen 3000.
And let's provide a little context here, because I think that was around the X370 X Power Titanium.
Correct.
Which, for all intents and purposes, that is a monster of a board. That thing has a massive VRM on it. Like a 2700X overclocked to crazy town couldn't tax that VRM. So,
yeah, the X-Power Titanium was the top of the line board from MSI on the X370 chipset.
Yeah. And for that support person to come out and say that because of electrical blah, 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 it won't support the new Ryzen or the new Zen 2's coming out, which Zen 2 is even more power efficient, is just crazy talk. So, well, yeah, that of course that blew up because I mean, forever now and a day, AMD's been saying we're supporting the socket till 2020, supporting the socket till 2020. So people that were early investors in the platform, namely the 300 series chipsets, invested in the platform for that reason. So yeah, I mean, it blew up to the point where I think you're leading on to this, where MSI had to come out and say, we're going to support Zen 2 on, I think they had a bulleted list, right, in the Forbes.
Right.
So Forbes had an article on it, but go ahead. I didn't mean to take your thunder.
But no, you're absolutely right. So MSI issued what they called a clarification, which was really PR damage control. Yep. And said clarification said, quote, "At this point, we are still performing extensive testing on our existing lineup of 300 and 400 series AM4 motherboards to verify potential compatibility for the next generation of AMD Ryzen CPUs. To be clear, our intention is to offer maximum compatibility for as many MSI products as possible. Towards the launch of the next-gen AMD CPUs, we will release a compatibility list of MSI AM4 motherboards. Below is a full list of upcoming BIOS versions, yada, yada, yada." And they did specifically list a whole bunch of X370 and B350 motherboards, along with X470 and B450 motherboards that would be receiving BIOS updates to support Ryzen 3000.
Yeah. But as I say this, and I say it again, if you went out and you bought a $50, whatever 350 or 450 motherboard that has a 3-phase VRM without a heatsink on it, don't try and mate that with a 12 or a 16 core potential Zen 2 processor that's coming out. That is beyond special. That's special thinking. That's crazy town. I mean, Don't even put it on a 4-phase VRM unless you've got water cooling on that VRM
I
or
mean,
some
technically
really
at
good.
stock, it might work, but it's
Yeah.
not going to be a good experience.
No, it's going to cause all kinds of problems. So, yeah.
I mean, my system right now is using a fairly mid-range X370 motherboard. It's the Gigabyte GA AX370 Gaming K5,
Okay.
which is a mid-tier X370 board, not super high end, but not that far from the high end either.
Hmm.
I think when it was new, it was like $150 to $170 board.
Yeah,
And
I'm not that familiar with those boards. Not as familiar as I am with the X470 variants.
well, the top end for the Gigabyte for their Aorus series was the Aorus Master, the X270 Aorus Master, and then below that you had the Gaming K7, and then you had the Gaming 5 and the Gaming K5, which were the same motherboard. The only difference was one had white shrouds with RGB and the other one had black shrouds with RGB.
Ah, okay. Because in the X470 line, they've got the Aorus Ultra Gaming and then the Gaming 5,
Right?
which are, for all intents and purposes, the same board. The only difference is, I don't know if they've got a different variant, but the Gaming 5 comes with a better heatsink for the VRM, which looks like an actual heatsink. Like there's a heat pipe connecting the SoC VRM on top to the main VRM on the side for power
Right.
delivery, but it's the same VRM. And I had troubles with my 2700X pretty much at stock on the Ultra Gaming. Um, so, and there's a massive upgrade when you go to the Gaming 7, which I don't know if that's their top end or not, but it's such a huge difference. So now I think if you water cooled the VRM on the Ultra Gaming and the Gaming 5, you'd be fine. I mean, you could get a mono block, and there's no way you're overheating that VRM, even with the 16 core. I think you'd be fine.
Right. And on my K5, my gaming K5 right now, I'm running a Ryzen 7 1800X. It's currently in stock, but I have overclocked it in the past. And the best I could get was about 3.85 gigahertz.
Okay. Were you doing any monitoring of your VRM temps?
I attempted to. I was using a combination of hardware monitor or HW monitor. Unfortunately, I didn't have any like K-type thermocouples that I could use. But
Oh, okay. Did you try hardware info?
um, that's what I meant when I use HW monitor. HW monitor is the higher end version of HW info.
Ah, okay. I've had decent luck with HW Info 64. So, oh, that's interesting. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to side or segue off of that, but I was
My
just
point
curious.
being, I know technically the chip is probably capable of 4.0, but on this motherboard, I really don't like pushing it much past about 3.8 to 3.9 gigahertz.
I understand.
It's probably capable of it. I I have enough issues as it is with heat buildup because I'm
Mm,
running the dual RX 480s, which
right.
so I
Yeah.
have no need to make it any worse.
Yeah. That's probably around 350 watts of heat at load for both of those things combined. So, yeah.
Right, and I've seriously considered a number of times pulling the second one just so the main one can breathe. I know uh, it would slightly decrease my performance in some titles, but you know, admittedly, the dual RX 480s was not the optimal configuration I was hoping for, and I was really hoping Crossfire this generation would be better than it is. But It turned out the way it does, and
Yeah,
at worst, I can use the second RX 480 in another machine.
yeah, and that's still a really good 1080p card.
But honestly, at this point, I'm just hoping for Navi.
Yeah.
Speaking of, I know I mentioned earlier in the show, we were going to talk a little more about Navi. This is a rumor, so treat it as such. It is from WCCF Tech. Make of that what you will.
Okay.
But this rumor is that AMD Navi will be debuting at E3, but launching on July the 7th with RTX 2080 class performance.
It's a pretty stout mention.
So I said, this is a rumor. Take it with the appropriate grains of salt. Exceedingly large grains of salt.
Yeah.
Still, we've heard this rumor several times, and it keeps coming back up, and there seems to be more evidence for it each time. So who knows? It may be true. But according to their sources within AMD, Navi apparently is going to be introduced at E3, but the hard launch will not be till the 7th of July. Now, given that Sony has already talked about Navi being in the PS5, there is a certain amount of sense to be made with AMD talking about Navi at E3 if Sony is going to be talking about the PlayStation 5. And I don't there's no indication that Sony is ready to show the PlayStation 5 yet.
Mm.
But if they do, then of course AMD is going to want to capitalize on that.
Well, that would be a good lead into a Navi announcement. And I mean, I definitely think that RTX 2070 level performance is a real possibility. But at a decent price point, but RTX 2080, ooh. RTX 2080 I want to say is between 20 and 30% faster than 2070. So that would be something.
So what we know so far is based on the rumors that the original rumors were that they were going to be called the AMD RX 3080, 3070, and 3060. And there were going to be two different variants, a Navi 10 GPU and a Navi 12 GPU, with the 12 being the smaller of the two.
Mm-hmm.
Supposedly, Navi 10 was supposed to be the RX 380, was rumored to be priced around $250 and deliver Vega 64, GTX 1080, RTX 2070 levels of performance.
Which that's pretty impressive. And that would kind of put it back to what they had at the launch of the RX 480. Because the 480, if I remember right, was right around GTX 980 level of performance, maybe a little slower.
Right. That was the idea, was to match the RX 480 matched the GTX 1060, the 6 gig variant, which at the time was the only variant.
Which should have been the only variant.
Well, that's a whole different discussion.
Yes, it is.
And the 1060, of course, matched the 980 from the previous generation.
Mm-hmm.
But again, all of this should be taken with a grain of salt because, well, these are, in fact, rumors.
Yeah, and all this stuff can change, at a moment's whim. Heck, we're just talking about rumors, and leaks. We're not even talking about bona fide release. I mean, AMD hasn't really said anything. So
Exactly. And to be honest, even if it only releases at RTX 2070 levels of performance for the 3080, then a $300, if it launched at $300 for the 3080, and it had the same performance level as an RTX 2070, that's still going to be highly disruptive for the market, because the RTX 2070, the cheap ones, start at $500.
I know. You have to get into an open box to get below $500. So,
and so if you release something with only the performance of an RTX 2070 for $300, that's going to have a massive cascade effect across Nvidia's stack. Because the whole pricing of everything below the RTX 2070 is dependent on the RTX 2070 being at $500. The RTX 2060 at $350 makes no sense if you have an RTX 2070 competitor for $50 less.
right. That's even more power efficient.
And the GTX 1660 and 1660 Ti at 220 and 280 respectively also don't make sense with a $300 RTX 2070 equivalent.
They sure don't, Mr. Ned.
So, but if they really do pull off a $300 RTX 2080 competitor, which I'm not sure I really buy that, but if they did, oh man, how that would disrupt the market.
I would be laughing for days. I
mean,
would be laughing for days.
That would be a total slash and burn to Nvidia's marketing.
It would be, but you know, it's kind of sad to say this, but they kind of have to do something like that. They have to do something that drastic and that disruptive to get back in the game.
Unfortunately, true.
Well, and I hate to say it, and I like Radeon parts, but they kind of did it to themselves, you know? I mean, ever since that Vega launch, I mean, 580, the Polaris parts have been hits for them, but that's really getting old, that architecture. As good and as efficient as it is, there's not much more they could do with it. And they messed up the Vega launch, and they messed up the Ryzen 7 launch. So, I mean, they've no one to blame but themselves for that. So, but we'll see what happens. I'm very excited about what's coming up.
Well, we know Nvidia will not be idle while AMD does all of this. They're, of course, working on their own 7-nanometer tech, which, of course, is codenamed Ampere. But in the meantime, Nvidia has been working with Linux developers for a welcome surprise in the upcoming Ubuntu 19.04 distribution. And that is that Ubuntu 19.04 is going to include a new feature for NVIDIA GPU owners. And this feature is that the operating system will download the most compatible driver for your generation of NVIDIA GPU.
It's kind of interesting.
Basically, this comes from Jason Evangelo over at Forbes. But it's based on something that originally was on the Ubuntu Mate blog. Those of you who follow Linux may know who Martin Wimpress is. He's the lead developer on Ubuntu Mate. That's M-A-T-E, by the way. Yes, I know it spells mate, but it said Mate. There's a long and dragged-out history. Just trust me on this. Why it's called Mate.
Right.
Anyway, he said
I called it mate for the longest time, you know. Go ahead.
He says in most regards 1904 is a modest upgrade. for Ubuntu. But this new particular feature uses a new package called Nvidia-SMI, which basically is a smart installer, for lack of a better term, that allows you to download the third-party graphics software from Nvidia that has the best compatibility with your GPU. Now, this is something I've run into in the past that can be an issue.
Mm-hmm.
I have an older laptop. It is, in fact, it's almost 11 years old at this point, but it has NVIDIA G8400 MS graphics. Those particular graphics have not been supported by NVIDIA drivers since NVIDIA 340 series drivers. And for comparison, the current NVIDIA drivers are 419. And so I always had to make sure with that older laptop that I am not accidentally upgrading the NVIDIA drivers to something that doesn't actually work with that machine. But now this should avoid that issue entirely.
So, based on the article, it looks like it downloads the most appropriate driver for your hardware, and that I guess there's a really good third-party variant of the Radeon driver, which is built into the kernel. So,
correct. That is the one advantage, in my opinion, that AMD has over NVIDIA in the Linux space is they release their own open source drivers, whereas NVIDIA, their drivers are all proprietary and it's nothing but a binary blob.
yeah. But still, I mean, it looks like it enhances support. You get a more stable experience. So, that's cool, man.
And so now, if you're wanting to consider gaming on Linux, now you'll have an easier experience of it, and I think that's nothing but a good thing. Whether you're on Team Red or Team Green.
Completely agree.
But of course, like I said, NVIDIA is not idle. We have talked about before the NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1650, which is going to be their new entry-level GPU, basically the successor for the ever-popular 1050 and 1050 Ti, which, by the way, are ridiculously priced right now.
Yes, they are.
Seriously, you can get an RX 570 for less money than you can a 1050 Ti, and an RX 570 will run away with it.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless, this particular leak, it is also from WCCF Tech, but this is a slightly more reliable bit of information because it comes straight from a benchmark database. This one from benchmark.pl. The GTX 1650 apparently has been listed for around $149.99 US. So $150 card puts it in roughly the same price category as the RX 570. And what we know, based on its preliminary specifications, it will be a 4 gigabyte GPU.
That's good.
It
At
will
least they're
have.
not making it a 2 gigabyte.
It'll be using a variant of the TU116 GPU, cut down, apparently called TU117.
Mhm.
It'll have 896 CUDA cores, 56 texture units, 32 ROPs, a base clock of 1486 megahertz, a boost clock of 1665 megahertz, and all on 128-bit bus. And with a total TDP of 75 watts.
So that's about half the CUDA core count of the current 2060. Wonder what kind of performance people can expect with this. It's interesting. 128-bit bus, DDR5 RAM, 75-watt power, right? So,
Some of the early estimates have put it roughly on par with the 1060, which would not be surprising.
well, they do have a nice IPC gain with Turing over Polaris. No,
Pascal.
Pascal. Pascal, yeah. So it could be.
I mean, the old 1060 was about what, 120-watt card.
Yeah.
So to cut it down to get similar performance out of 75-watt TDP is impressive in and of itself.
Well, and I mean, you can go up and down the product stack, but uh, so if it's got performance on par with the 1066 gig, the 1066 gig had 1280 CUDA cores. This is rumored to have 896, so that would put it, within the ballpark of that IPC game.
So yeah, interesting for that. Like I said, there has been a pricing reveal for these. It's supposed to be starting around $150, but it looks like some of the early models were listed on a French site, and it was showing them at around $170 to $180, or 180 euros, I should say, on those sites as a pre-order. So again, that could just be because this is a pre-order price, and the actual price on launch will be, the $149.99 MSRP, or these could just be the higher end EVGA models, and so that's why you're seeing the commiserate increase in price. Regardless,
yeah, $180 just seems too high for me. I don't know.
yeah, at 150, it's an interesting proposition against the RX 570. At 180, you completely lost me.
Yeah, it's still a little rough for me to stomach a 1660 at 230, but I could do it if I had to. But 150 for a 50 level part? Yeah, I don't know. Have to wait and see reviews on it. I'm not expecting much, honestly, but I mean, if they get 1060 level performance, okay, you know.
I mean, it would be nice to be able to take like an average pre-built, like say a Dell Optiplex, and drop a 1650 in there and be able to have 1060 level performance without having to have a upgraded power supply. But
Yeah.
at that point, you know, is is a $150 card really what you're looking at that price point? Because if you're trying to do the whole budget build thing, where you take an older Optiplex with a quad core Core i5, say like the one I have that has a Core i5 4590, and 8 to 16 gigs of RAM, is a 1650 really the best thing to pair with that? I don't know.
Well, I mean, say you've got a lower end system or SFF system or whatever, and you don't want to, you want the most powerful card you can have within a 75-watt power envelope. You just want to run off of that PCI Express bus. This card makes sense for that.
Right. And in that regard, it fills the same niche that the 750 Ti did and the 1050 Ti did.
Mm-hmm. Beyond that, though, it doesn't make much sense.
Indeed. Speaking of low power, Intel is rumored to be launching on May the 15th new 9th gen 8-core CPUs, but with a twist. These are only 35-watt parts. And they apparently codenamed Kikatek.
Kikatek.
They were listed on Kikatek. My apologies.
That sounds like anime something, man.
They're actually a UK retailer. So these are the T series processors, not to be confused with the Indian entertainment channel of the
Dude,
same name on YouTube.
dude, you put that stuff. Oh, we're talking about this now. Okay.
Well, they are the Intel T series CPUs. The joke writes itself.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, Intel's 9th generation 35-watt T series CPUs are essentially the same 9th generation CPUs we all know and love, only they're at a 35-watt TDP. I will share this chart from AnandTech, and I will make it bigger for everyone's benefit. So these 35-watt CPUs still feature 8 cores, 16 threads for the 9900T, 8 cores, 8 threads for the 9700T. Again, these look exactly like the CPUs we've seen before, only the clock speeds are significantly down for the base frequencies, and they all have a 35-watt TDP. So a 35-watt TDP means these are designed for a use case where you need the threads, but not necessarily the clock frequency. Because I don't know what a 9900 8-core 16 thread at 2.1 gigahertz would be like to use.
I have no idea. I have no idea. I mean, even just limiting it to 95 watts kind of limits a 9900. So I'm not sure, man.
But I suppose in small form factor or systems where you are power constrained, these could be potentially useful. I mean, I'm not sure where you'd want 8 cores, 16 threads in a low power system, unless this is some kind of office machine or budget workstation.
I have no idea. I could see a 6-core 12 thread, maybe with a higher clock speed. I mean, I could think of a few use cases for that. But
Well,
a high core, high thread CPU that's got a low clock speed, and maybe even though it's got a decent turbo, to maintain that, it's going to have algorithms and stuff within the motherboard BIOS to limit the CPU to a 35-watt TDP. So it's not going to be sitting at decent clock speeds for very long. So I can't think of what decent use cases for that would be.
Well, regardless, these CPUs should be debuting on May the 15th. And for further confirmation that these indeed are coming, both the Gigabyte and BioStar have added these to their CPU support lists for their Intel 300 series chipsets.
Cool.
And they have been added. Some have been added to the BIOS, others not so much. But 35-watt TDP CPUs, I'm glad to see Intel trying something in the low power space.
Yeah, I'd just be interested to hear what those use cases are. Uh, I like the fact that they can run off of current chipset motherboards. Are they locked?
Given their T series CPUs, almost certainly.
Meh.
If it doesn't have a K or an X when it comes to an Intel CPU, you can forget trying to overclock it.
Yeah,
Unless you're wanting to do funky things with the base clock.
there's only so much you can do with that,
Right.
depending on the board.
Yeah, in general, you're going to get maybe a couple hundred megahertz off that.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
Well,
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get enthusiastic about it, but I'm not.
yeah.
I don't
Well, you might have good reason not to be enthusiastic about Intel CPUs right now because Coalfire, which is a cybersecurity firm, has released what they call their death metal suite for Intel CPUs. So they've released this code onto GitHub, and it is essentially a proof of concept exploit of Intel's active management technology for
know.
remote administration.
Okay. Oh, that's right. I remember reading about this. I
So
remember reading about this.
basically, what AMT allows you to do
Yeah,
is to do remote administration easily on Intel systems.
right.
The problem is that AMT has access to a lot of things you normally wouldn't want to have access to, which are great for administrators, but, well, as the Death Metal Toolkit or the Death Metal Suite lets you do, you can exploit those legitimate features to to subvert the system to basically act as your way into a corporate network.
Yeah, it's a back door. Right. So, yeah.
So, this particular article was written by Victor Teisler, who is a security consultant with Coalfire Security. And basically, what he did is that he reverse engineered the AMT technology into Python.
I already know where this is going.
And so he developed this suite of tools into what he is calling the Death Metal Toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
It uses what's called a keyboard video multiplexer, which is an AMT remoting technology that allows VNC access to the target computer. He takes advantage of that.
Okay.
Uses a he uses a program called Pickles to send data to a target system with AMT provisioned. And because it uses UDP port 16994, Wireshark does not detect that you are in fact attacking the victim machine.
Okay.
Once you get in using this suite of tools, you can go in and you can wipe logs from AMT. You can manipulate the AMT the proprietary technologies, including IDE redirect, which allows you to attach remote floppies and CDR DVD devices. And basically, it allows you to own the machine without the machine knowing you own the machine.
Right.
Basically, Intel's active management technology, once again, Intel has another security vulnerability on its hands, and, well, I don't know what they're going to do about it, because this code for this particular suite of the death metal suite, as they call it, is available for free on GitHub for anyone to download.
Interesting.
Which that's actually not that uncommon, because a lot of these security researchers and security consulting firms, they work with one another. They open source their proof of concept code so that everybody can see how the attack works, so they can figure out how to fix it. So that's not that uncommon, but still, once it goes open source and it's on GitHub, literally anybody can get access to it.
Right.
So make of that what you will. The probability that this is affecting your particular machine, if you're not running a corporate machine that, if you, as long as you're not running anything that uses vPro, you're probably okay. vPro is Intel's virtual professional vPro that enables some of these AMT features. If you're using consumer grade laptop, you probably don't have anything to worry about. You have a laptop from work that has AMT enabled, you might want to point your local IT, and in particular your security people, toward this article so they can go take a look.
Right.
In the meantime, that's all of our news this week, but we do have a few hardware deals to highlight this week.
So Hunter put a heck of a deal on 256 gig NVMe M.2 drive in the I don't know what you call it, the chat, Facebook chat, maybe.
Okay, let's see. Oh yes, he added that after the show started.
Mm-hmm.
So $36.99 for a 256 gigabyte NVMe M.2 SSD. Let's see if I can pull that up real quick. This is from Newegg Business. Okay. Okay, I will bring this over. I did not originally have this in the show notes. You know what? We can add it on the fly. So let's go ahead and share this page where everybody can see it. This is the Patriot Scorch M.2 2280 256 gigabyte PCIe 3.0 times 2. That's an important distinction there. NVMe solid state drive. So this is an NVMe drive, but it is PCIe Express 3.0 by 2. So it's only using half as much bandwidth as your high-end NVMe drives. Now that said, you can still get plenty fast performance with this. Up to 1700 megabytes per second reads. And according to the specs, you can see reads and writes 1700 megabytes per second reads, 780 megabytes per second writes.
Nice.
So that's still a solid upgrade over a SATA SSD. And for the 256 gigabyte version at $36.99, if you want to try out NVMe and see if it's a sufficient performance uplift for you to go to that from a SATA SSD, then this is a pretty cheap way to find out.
That's not bad. That is not bad. I must admit, senor.
All right, moving on. This one I included not because this particular deal is that great, but so we could also talk about the fact that if you have a micro center in your area, you can get an even better deal than this one. Now, admittedly, yes, Ryzen 3000 is right around the corner. And so it might seem kind of silly to buy a first-gen Ryzen part right now. And that's an argument you could make. But if you are looking to get 6 cores and 12 threads as cheaply as possible, then you cannot go wrong with the Ryzen 5 1600. 6 cores, 12 threads, 3.2 gigahertz base, 3.6 gigahertz turbo, with a very simple overclock, typically capable between 3.8 and 3.9 gigahertz, 4.0 if you win the Silicon Lottery. For $120, this is an excellent deal. Now,
Yeah, I agree to that.
that said, if you happen to have a micro center near where you live, right now you can get this same processor for not $120, not $100, but $80, $79.99. And at that price, $80 for 6 cores, 12 threads, that is a no-brainer.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you're looking for a solid motherboard to pair with this, or perhaps you want to have a base that you can plop this Ryzen 5 1600 in there today, and then maybe move to a Ryzen 3000 CPU when they come out later, then consider this ASRock X470 Master SLI AC. This is an AM4 motherboard. It is on the X470 chipset. It is a lower-end X470 motherboard, but at $134.99 on sale, it's still a very good value. But wait, there's more. Right now, there is a $25 rebate on this particular motherboard. So that once you've purchased the motherboard and gotten back your rebate, you can get this board for $110.
Which that's a good deal.
As you can see, it has a decent heatsink. It has decent VRMs. Again, it's not the highest end X470 motherboard, but it is solid.
Right.
And me in particular, I like the mostly neutral aesthetic of the motherboard. Yes, it does have the RGBs around the chipset down there, but honestly, it's not a particularly flashy board, but it'll do everything you need it to do.
Right.
And it does support M.2 SSDs, so if you wanted to use that Patriot Scorch on here, you most certainly could. And of course, if you get the Ryzen 5 1600 and you put it on this X470 motherboard, you're going to need some compatible RAM.
You found a RAM deal, didn't you?
Well, I did.
What'd you
Now,
find?
I debated between this one and a couple others that were out there, but I eventually went with this one because this is an AMD certified kit. This is a Gale Super Luce RGB Sync AMD edition 16 gigabyte kit of DDR4 3000 memory. Now, the timings on it are a little bit loose at 16, 18, 18, 36, but with those looser timings, you get better compatibility between Intel and AMD motherboards. And because this is an AMD certified kit, it should work just fine with that CPU and that motherboard we just showed off.
Nice.
Plus, RGB. That makes everything better, right?
Right. I'd agree to that.
Well, then again, I'm the guy who has RGB on a lot of his stuff and then goes and sets it all to the same color. So, because I'm monochromatic like that, I guess.
It's all right. There's a certain aesthetic for that, you know?
And so, oh, I forgot to mention the price. 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3000, for $85. Now,
Not
yes,
bad.
you can find DDR4 3000 a bit cheaper than that. There was actually a kit that I was going to show that is a little bit cheaper than that, but the timings are actually looser than this one, and that kit was not AMD certified. So I went with this one instead.
Not bad.
And with that, sadly, we have once again reached the end of our show. So, Jason, do you have anything else you'd like to discuss or anything you'd like to add?
Uh, Not much. I mean, it seems like we're in almost a holding pattern until, Zen 2 and Navi and all that stuff gets put out there in the public eye. So, um, I don't know. I've got mixed feelings. I know last week I said that, it's a good time to buy, but I don't know. I'm kind of thinking it might be a good time to wait. I mean, if you absolutely need a system now, there are really good deals out there. Um, Myself, I've been really tempted to pick up a 1 terabyte SSD, but I'm holding off. Uh, I'm kind of biding my time and saving my money back to see what happens. I don't think I'll be getting a new video card anytime soon, but we'll see what happens on the CPU front. I mean, at the very least, SSD prices are insanely good, and it's a great time to see that the RAM prices are coming down too. So,
Yeah, like we just talked about, the fact that
mhm.
you get an NVMe SSD that's 256 gigabytes for literally $40, less than $40, is insane.
Yeah,
Yes, it's not the fastest one in the market, but it's an NVMe SSD that's way faster than any SATA SSD out there, and you will pay less for it than you will most of the SATA-based SSDs in the same price class.
but I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, you just get whatever size SSD that you can afford in your budget. If that's a
Fair.
SATA, if it's an NVMe, I mean, M.2 is really attractive because it's a small form factor and doesn't require any cabling at all.
It's literally plug and play.
Yeah, very much literally. And now NVMe pricing has almost, if not has reached parity with SATA controlled SSDs. So, or SATA, whatever. You know what I'm saying? So yeah. Oh, hey, I heard something interesting recently. So Radeon, or not Radeon, but the Intel graphics group is getting really chum with Samsung, and there's been some rumors leaked about their 5 nanometer process.
Interesting.
So yeah, so
Something to keep on the lookout for.
there might be something there. That would be really cool to see them come out with something around Samsung's 5 nanometer process, because Samsung has been shopping some potential customers for that. So if that would take the stress off of Intel's current fabs, and could be really interesting, because if the rumors are right, they're going to be releasing this multi GPU technology that makes where they have an API, and the driver would basically, lend out the GPU resources so that it looks like one GPU pool of hardware resources, where in fact it could be two or four or whatever. So it's kind of interesting, reading about some of these potential leaks and where they're kind of going, because they've got a lot of smart people over there, and we could definitely use another player in the graphics space.
Indeed. Because
So
let's face it, right now in the PC space, you basically have AMD and Nvidia, with
mhm.
Intel with their integrated graphics, which aren't really competitive. But
Right. Go ahead.
And really, the only other place to look for graphics chips are into the mobile space with the Adreno chips from Qualcomm, which are the whole reason they're called Adreno is because they're a iteration of an older version of Radeon chips.
Mm-hmm.
They use a modified version of the Radeon HD 6000 architecture that has been hyper optimized for low power usage
Oh my gosh.
because it uses a very long instruction word 5.
Talk about something showing its teeth. Wow.
But
That's
yeah,
been a while.
and then you have the Mali GPUs based on the ARM designs,
Mm-hmm.
which anyway, we've kind of rabbit trailed here, but yeah, that's something you might want to conclude for the show for next week.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find some stuff about that because I saw a video on it and then I was looking around and I for uh, for some posts on it and I haven't found much yet in the term of written form, but I'll try and it did pique my interest because I'm keenly interested to see what Intel can bring to the table because they've got a lot of smart talent over there right now.
Yep.
So yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens.
All right. Well, in that case, we will bring things to a close. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed the content you've seen here, of course, you can catch us every week with your latest tech news on TechForge. You can also check out CrossForge Gaming all across the web. You can find us 5 nights a week, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central on twitch.tv/CrossForgeGaming. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and in our Discord community, which is linked down below in the description. In the meantime, I've been Dynamo Ned. This has been TechForge. And remember, when life has you down, Jesus loves you, and forge on.
He does?